All right, and welcome everyone to Rock M Radio. This is the beginning of a brand new episode of Dive Cuts, and we are live on YouTube for Rock M Plus subscribers. I guess these days we're live on YouTube for all YouTube subscribers as well. So if you're joining us live, thank you. We're here to talk Mizzou basketball. I'm your host, Sam Snelling. You'll see me on the right. With me, as always, Mr. Matt Harris from the plains of central Indiana. Matt, how are you?
I'm well. I'm very, very well. Not sure if I'm going to have as much vigor as I did when we talked about a win over Kentucky, but them's the breaks when you talk about Missouri basketball. Otherwise, can't complain, and we'll see what the night brings.
Last we met, yeah, we were. I think we were talking sort of hopefully about being able to kind of navigate the week and go 1-1. They did that, just maybe the opposite way that I think maybe a lot of people might want, or maybe expect. I
Yeah.
think coming off the win at Rupp, there was sort of maybe a renewed optimism around Mizzou basketball that like maybe they're kind of figuring things out. Um, I don't know. Like I thought they were still not really playing great. Um, they sort of muscled through the Florida game, got a little lucky with some bounces there late. Um, Kind of did the same with Kentucky. Really out executed the Wildcats and like the last 4 minutes. And I'm not trying to say they didn't deserve those wins. They deserved to win. They won the game. They deserved to win. Um, but it really wasn't the sort of brand of basketball that I think we saw kind of the same time last year, where you just saw like this version of Missouri where like like we've got an exciting team here, and really kind of liking the way that they were playing. They were figuring out how to win, and I think going to Ole Miss, it looked like we were getting a better version of the Tigers at the beginning of the game, and then just things just sort of like fell apart. I think once the threes stopped going in, they sort of like kept settling for a lot of those jumpers. They were turning the ball over. I mean, I don't have to like recap a whole lot of this because I'm sure most of you watched it, but when you turn the ball over 13 times and you shoot sub 30% from outside the arc, and that's not even touching the fact that they were, missing half of their free throws. You just leave a lot on the table, and especially like when they were so efficient inside the arc, it was sort of frustrating to watch offensively. A team turn it over, not make free throws, not make threes, and when they were just pitching it inside, they were getting good looks.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing for me to reconcile as I went through doing the rewatch and even writing lineup review over the weekend was, you know, what is this signal or is this noise? Or were the Florida Kentucky games signal or noise? It's hard to tell because it's still a team that's got probably the fullest complement of players it's had all year. Um, at the same time, Dennis is chopping down the rotation significantly in ways that I quibble with a little bit, but we can talk about that later. But how much stock do you put in the Florida and Kentucky wins relative to this? It's sort of that weird thing for me right now. Do you look at what happened Saturday and say, from an optimistic perspective, you know, they were maybe feeling themselves a little bit from the win earlier in the week. They kind of overlooked Ole Miss, and after they got up 22-12, they just sort of lost focus. And the things that we saw, in terms of ball security, in terms of shot selection at times, and definitely in terms of defense at times, it was a team that wasn't quite as locked in as it needed to be. They paid a price for it, and it's going to click them back in, and that could be true. That's a plausible explanation. Or you could look at it from this perspective, which is, they've been playing a really, really short bench. They've been playing really, really slow. They've been really grinding out the pace offensively. They've really needed, the defense to sort of carry them at times. And if there's one thing that doesn't go right, I think you noted correctly in study hall that Jaden Stone and Mark Mitchell were the only guys that really carried it. If there's not the right balance offensively or that everything's clicking just enough, this team can get kind of cattywampus and things can go sideways on them. And we saw that, because you're not going to have everything go perfectly for you every night in conference play. Maybe Ole Miss was that in extremis, but the larger point stands. This is still a flawed team that got some good results early, and the flaws that we saw throughout non-con at times are still present, and they've got to work them out, and they haven't yet. I think this week is going to give us obviously more clarity on that. So I think the hardest part for me is figuring out how much weight to really put on this result and sort of evaluate it as sort of a data point for where this team is. Ultimately, it was just a really frustrating basketball game to watch. To watch, I thought a lot of times just poor decision making. I don't think Ole Miss forced a lot of those turnovers. Times it was just poor ball handling, poor decision making. Watching a team that had really executed fantastically in ball screen defense for 2 games just struggle to fight over ball screens consistently. Not seeing anybody rebound for the last 10 minutes, giving up 5 offensive rebounds in the last 2 minutes of a game where you needed to win. Just a lot of stuff there are things that you have to execute every game, but particularly on the road, and watching them not do that after they had done so well, sort of executing those fundamentals for 2 games was particularly dire to watch. But we'll see how much of that is acute versus systematic, and we're only going to figure that out as we go through this week. So it was frustrating to watch, and it's frustrating to even sort of kind of evaluate after the fact.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those like multiple things can be true situations where, I mean, it is hard to win on the road. It is hard to win on the road in the SEC. Even the bottom of the SEC are, some quality basketball teams. Like, I don't think Ole Miss is going to confuse anyone for an NCAA tournament team, but, like South Carolina, like last year was the basement of the league, and they're looking like they're going to be close to it this year. And it's hard to win in Columbia, South Carolina. And so like you never apologize for winning when you do it, and whoever it is that you beat, you're happy to beat them. Um, with that said, like it's also true that Missouri really missed an opportunity here.
Yeah.
Because of their wins over Florida, their win over Kentucky. You set yourself up to be in really really good position if you're able to get to 3-0, and then you're coming home 3-0. And that's the other thing is like you're getting 2 wins on the road to start the season, and coming home with a chance to go to 4-0, and then your 5th game is on the road at LSU, who's quite frankly looked pretty terrible at the start of the season.
Yeah.
Or at the start of the conference season. And so like a chance to go to 4, maybe 5-0, and now like you're gonna have to scrap and claw against Auburn. I mean, Auburn's gonna be ready. They usually are. But their 2 losses are both one in overtime, or did these other game go to overtime, or is that just last second? Yes. So the A&M obviously came down to like a last second shot also, and they blew the doors off Arkansas. So like you have like this thing where it's like, okay, like you had a chance to get to 3-0 coming home for an Auburn game, and then you had maybe some wiggle room, like if things didn't go right against Auburn. Now you're sitting in that situation, and like that's going to drag you right back down to 500 if things don't go right against Auburn. So I think they had a chance to sort of take control fairly early in the conference season. And they let things get away from them. Credit to Ole Miss. Ole Miss made shots.
Yeah.
Something that they haven't done very consistently all year. Kind of unfortunate. But at the same time, like you have to feel, if you're in Missouri, you have to feel like this is a really, really big missed opportunity.
Yeah, I sent it out on Twitter after the game, sort of what the history of 3-0 is. And that's not, since 2013, 30 teams have started 3-0. And basically, there's no correlation to that. I didn't run any descriptive stats or bivariate analysis or anything. It's just sort of more like anecdotal. Like, let's take a look at what's happened with teams that have started 3-0. So it wasn't meant to be like this is predictive or anything. It's just sort of like let's look observationally at what's happened. About 80% of the time, those teams make the NCAA tournament. About 78% of the time, they're a top four seed in the SEC tournament. The worst a team has ever done out of that group was 8-10 and finished ninth. So realistically, the best way to look at that sample is going 3-0, if nothing else, locks you into a mid-table finish. And if you're and most years, this would not be the case given Missouri's weak non-con, but if you play a typical non-con schedule and go 9-9 in the SEC and finish in the top 8, you're probably going to feel good about getting on the bubble. So what I don't look at what 3-0 sets as a ceiling. I look at the floor it sets. And if Missouri had gotten to 3-0, you could have probably looked at their schedule and said, all right, there are multiple pathways now to at least 9 or 10 wins, and they've helped themselves. Now, moving through, when can they pick off opportunities to maybe get to 11, maybe 12? I wasn't trying to imply that they had somehow automatically dropped off the pace for a conference title. What 3-0 would have done was give them a pretty good set of diverse options to get to 9 or 10 wins, which this team has to do if it wants to really give itself a chance at an at-large bid. That doesn't mean that they're screwed now that they're 2-1, but that's what the missed opportunity was for me, was to give yourself multiple pathways as you move through the next 2 months, because this was also, at least on win probability, their second easiest road game. And you were getting a team that was struggling. You were coming off 2 games you were playing well. This was a matchup that I thought favored them pretty well. And if you looked at, if Missouri had had a typical game in terms of its turnover rate and in terms of free throw shooting, they probably win by 8 points. So, the inability to execute, the inability to play cleanly cost them a chance to get to 3-0 and kind of forestalled or made it harder for them now in some ways to push to 9, 10, 11 wins, which they're going to need as a floor if you want to keep talking about bubble or postseason odds. So I think that's where I come down is, it's not damning, but that's one of those things you could look back at in late February and go, oh, we needed that one. And if you're thinking that now, it'll probably hurt more when you get there. So we'll see what they can do. I think I texted you guys Sunday saying that the thing about the SEC this year is it's so flattened out in terms of talent across the league that you can look at Auburn and LSU and still say maybe they can go 2-0 this week because these are both teams that also have their own flaws. So I think that's the one saving grace here is the reset has been pretty hard across the SEC, that there's not a week where you look at it and go, oh man, if we can scratch out a win, we're great. I think, the first 3 weeks of the season came with a chance for Missouri to go 3-3 pretty, without having to really stretch. We'll see what they can do this week, but 3-0 coming home would have really started to open some doors. Because at 4-0, you can really start to talk about some of the higher possibilities of where you're going to be in the league race. But 3-0 probably just would have made us go, okay, they're probably going to be tracking towards middle of the pack. And now that's fungible. So
yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the week coming up. So I didn't really want to spend a whole lot of time, rehashing what was behind us. Talking about losses is always a lot less fun. Talk about wins, and you guys already talked about Kentucky in the live show on Wednesday night. So this Wednesday night, another 6 p.m. tip. That's Central Time for those of us that are all in the Central Time Zone. Which is, for me a little unusual. I think I'm used to kind of Mizzou getting a lot of the 8 o'clock tips. But yeah, 6 o'clock against Auburn. And then this weekend, they have a 2:30 tip at LSU. So Auburn. Dennis has not beaten Auburn yet. However, Bruce Pearl is no longer coaching on the sidelines. They now have his son, Steven. And Steven has not quite been as good as his dad, as far as like some of the late game stuff. Auburn seems to be coming up short a little more frequently. This is still, according to Ken Pom, a loss. Auburn is 31st in KenPom. They are 10-6. Having throttled Arkansas probably gave them a little bit of a bump to flip this from a win to a loss. But Auburn has not really lost to a bad team yet. Our
No.
worst loss is the home loss to Texas A&M. Um, every other loss, top 30,
Yeah.
most of them in the top 10.
Yeah.
So they're good. They're not as good as they've been, but they're good.
Yeah. I I think this is it's a question of what version of Auburn shows up. I was looking at the nice part now is we're in the time of year where there's enough data where you can kind of click the conference only button on KimPom and just sort of see, after 3 games, where teams sit. Auburn's, a top 10 offense in the country. They're the best, they're the most efficient offense in SEC play. But the thing that jumps out to me is they're 13th in defensive efficiency across 3 games here. That's weird for an Auburn team that was always sort of physical, assertive, took pride in guarding. And the biggest thing here too is they're getting absolutely killed in the paint. I think they're like 13th in paint defense. They're allowing the average distance for 2 point shots is like 4 or 5 feet out. They have a low block rate. Like, it's so weird to not see an Auburn team just absolutely demolish anyone who dares put 2 feet in the paint. And teams are getting there with abandon right now. So if you're Missouri, you look at this and go, okay, if we guard the way we want, if we can at least hold the line defensively, you know, Kashawn Murphy's not a rim protector. Their best rim protector is Kashawn Hall, a guard.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so their bigs are pretty good rebounders, but there's not a lot of backline rim protection. Sometimes they're using 6'9" Sebastian Williams Adams is big. Point is, Missouri's been wanting to get a ton of paint touches every game. They've been wanting to get downhill, grind possessions, get to the paint. Auburn will let you do that. Auburn is letting teams do that right now. So, and they're also slightly foul prone as well. So they're putting teams on the line. If you're Missouri, you look at this matchup and go, if we can be competent defensively and we can grind the tempo a little bit and we're at home, we can get this game on our terms and we can get paint touches, we can get fouls. And Auburn, again, a lot like Florida, a lot like kind of Kentucky in a certain way, not that deep either. So, as particularly at ball handler spots. So I think that that's really what Missouri's got to look at is this will not be aesthetically pleasing. The games so far have not been aesthetically pleasing in conference play, but that's probably the right approach here is to just say, can we make this a meat grinder and just get 2 feet in the paint and see if we can just wear Auburn down? You know, that's sort of where I start with for this one.
Yeah, Keyshawn Hall is having a really good season. 131 offensive rating. He's getting to the free throw line a lot. Free throw rate is 31st in the country, drawing 7 fouls a game. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And he's shooting 44.8% from 3 point range. Um, but I mean, we kind of knew when they were signing, Keyshawn Murphy, that the interior of their defense was going to suffer a bit. Especially coming off, the man that they had patrolling the middle the last few years. Um, I've been a little bit surprised to see that Elijah Freeman has been playing better than I thought he would at this point. Kevin Overton,
Solid.
obviously like a quality guard. Pettiford has sort of been really up and down. I think a lot of people sort of had him and maybe LeBaron Philon as sort of the most likely guys to sort of hit as sophomores, and certainly Philon's done that. I don't think Pettiford quite has done it to the same degree.
He's
But
struggling to
still,
shoot it from deep.
yeah,
He's really
still he's still a dangerous offensive player. And as we saw against Ole Miss, like a dangerous offensive player, if they get going, they can certainly make your life difficult, and that's AJ Storr. Um, and if there's one area where Missouri sort of struggles, it's struggling to find guys that are making shots and take them out of their rhythm. Um, this is a game that like I would I really hate that Auburn is good at basketball. um, there's a lot of SEC schools that I feel that way about, but Auburn is kind of towards the top. I'm not a big Bruce Pearl fan. I don't think his son deserved the job. I think it's kind of cronyism at its finest to to retire when you did, to make sure that they have to hire your son and give him millions of dollars to coach D1 men's basketball. So I would like to see this experiment fail, if for no other reason than that. And it's been interesting, like, to watch their season unfold. They have some good quality wins. They beat St. John's. They beat NC State. Uh, they beat Oregon. They narrowly lost to Houston. They got blown away by Michigan, but Michigan is blowing away, especially through that time.
That's true. They were on a heater.
They were blowing everybody out by 30, so that's understandable. Then they went to Arizona. Probably not a wise decision in hindsight. Arizona was terrific. They also, blew the doors off Auburn in that game. And then they lost pretty ugly against Purdue, and was virtually a home game for Purdue.
Yeah,
so
virtually was a home game.
So it is hard to kind of get a gauge on like what kind of team Auburn really is. I mean, we had some concerns about sort of like the makings of the rotation, before the season, and then Bruce retired, and you're like, okay, like this is a different way to kind of look at the lineup, but is Steven going to be able to sort of corral the knuckleheads the way that Bruce always did? Like, Bruce could recruit anybody. I mean, what he got out of what's the dude's name? It's at USC now. Just
Chad Baker Mazzara.
Yeah, Baker Mazzara, like an absolute clown, like on the floor, and Bruce is able to take guys like that and get them to play really, really good basketball. And Steven seems like he's still kind of figuring that part out.
Yeah. I think the hard thing for me about Auburn, you mentioned about what version shows up, is, I'm looking over their offensive and defensive efficiencies for their players here. Keshawn Hall's got a 26.9 net rating. Todd Pettiford, 0.9. That's something you wouldn't have expected. Kevin Overton, 18.5 net rating. That's good. Elijah Freeman, 8.9. That's good. Sebastian Williams-Adams, 8.9. The difference is here that they're just not getting kind of the consistent production like you mentioned earlier out of Pettiford. If Pettiford was average, 1.0 points per possession, I think this team would look a lot different. And Sebastian Williams-Adams is 91 points per 100 possessions. That's solid for a freshman. They brought him in as a defensive tool for them, so he's doing what he's supposed to do. If you get good Todd Pettiford and he's showing up and he's hitting shots consistently and in rhythm, this top six for them is better than Missouri's top six. It's just more consistent. They've got more consistent shot making. They've got more, I think, even production across that rotation in their top four. And, when you look at the lineup level data, there's way more consistency in terms of positive net ratings for lineups across their most used groups. So realistically, it's, can you disrupt Todd Pettiford? Can you put more onus on guys like Caden Magwood, a freshman who is probably their second best, is probably their backup point guard, but struggling offensively. Kevin Overton is not a point guard.
Well, so Magwood I think you've didn't play against Arkansas.
No, and he's only kind of thrown in a pinch. But point being, if Pettiford is sort of, boggy or struggling to get going, I think this team is a little bit more gettable in terms of a win here. I think the one thing I would say is, Pettiford's also a little bit foul prone too. So I think if you're Missouri, it's, we're going to put a smaller point guard like we did with Florida. We're going to put those point guards in action, or we're going to see if they can hold up. Maybe we put a couple quick fouls on Pettiford. Maybe Pettiford's got to go sit. And now Auburn's got to have Overton or Magwood running the point. Or they've got to put Hall at the point. He's not a natural point guard. He's a scoring guard. He's not a natural point guard. So I think for Missouri, you've got to find a way for this play style and this tempo and the way you sort of execute your game plan to put Auburn on tilt and stretch, what their top six can do. Because if you let them play the way they want and Pettiford gets into a rhythm, I think this is a game that Auburn's got just more balance and consistency offensively. So Missouri's got to find a way again to kind of muck it up, to kind of make it uncomfortable for Auburn to play. And we'll see if they can handle that. But it's a gettable game out there. I think Missouri has some advantages, like we talked about a little bit ago, to get a win here. But it's going to require something that they didn't do on Saturday, and that's consistency of execution. We've seen it in two other games. Can they get back to that standard? If they can, I think maybe they can find a way to eke out another result here or grind out another result at home.
Well, and this is a game where you'd like to see a big effort from Mark Mitchell.
Yeah,
I mean, I realize that maybe that's becoming a little bit of an every game thing, and I think the way that the team is constructed um, ended up being very much that. But Mark has been very good. Struggled a little bit from the floor against Florida, to be expected. I mean, their
that
interior
front line.
size is really difficult. But outside of that, like Mark's been really good all year,
Yeah,
and he is a guy that can put a lot of fouls on teams. And I don't know that uh, Auburn has a really good one-on-one matchup, so they're going to uh, have to sort of approach it from a team perspective, hoping to kind of slow him down. And then like can Missouri get you know a second, third, fourth guy kind of rolling? And they seem to be able to do that a lot better when they're at home
yeah,
versus versus going on the road. So
yeah.
there's also hope. Maybe we get Javon Porter back. He kind of adds to your depth. I guess it's possible we've seen the last of Sebastian Mack. They don't seem very interested in playing him two
I
games in a
hope his
row now.
mom knows where he is. We don't. Hope his family's aware of where he is.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
worried for him now.
He's a MIA a little bit. Um, but yeah, I mean, this is one of those situations where like you're home. I think if you beat Ole Miss, you have a little more wiggle room to
Yeah,
to lose this one. Now I don't know that you do. And then you have to turn around and go to LSU. Um, and so LSU, we were pretty skeptical of LSU and their build. Matt McMahon is coaching for his job. He's went out and didn't schedule anybody.
to be
and
fair,
the
there are other programs with the name with a mascot as a tiger that did not schedule anybody at home in non-con either.
hey,
So glass houses, my friend. We
yeah,
reside
at
in
least
one.
this glass house on this end has to play Illinois and Kansas every year. Um, but yeah, so LSU did play Texas Tech. They lost badly to Texas Tech. They did beat SMU, which is turning into a pretty good quality win at this point. But then the start of conference play, they lost a close one to Texas A&M.
Mm-hmm.
They lost a not close one to South Carolina at home, which was a bit of a confusing effort. I don't know if anybody was paying attention to that game. Like South Carolina, I think at one point was like up by 25, if I have that
Yeah,
right.
that was a weird game flow. Absolutely weird.
Yeah, LSU like was able to kind of get it narrowed back down, ended up winning by 10 or losing by 10, and we're talking about LSU. And then they went and they played Vandy pretty tough
They put up a
at
fight in
at
Nashville.
Vandy. Vandy kind of opened it up a little bit. I think at one point they had a 20-point lead,
Yeah,
but LSU cut it down single digits and kind of
they
put heat
fought
on
back
them.
twice.
Yeah, ended up losing by 11, but I think they were for a lot of the second half they had that thing in single digits and were really kind of putting some decent game pressure on the Commodores. So
Yeah,
I was just gonna say, like, what do we make of this LSU team? I don't know what to make of them. They're 40th in KenPom. That seems high, but it's because they were blowing out a lot of bad teams earlier in the year. Credit to them for doing that. Missouri didn't always do that.
yeah. Again, glass house, man. What would this team look like with Dana Thomas? He's been out for 3 games. So much of their offense flows through him as a creator. They're playing a freshman in Jalen Reese, who is a nice, prospect, but kid's got, I'm looking at it right here, a 68.8 offensive rating and a 105.4 defensive rating. They are, his BPR is 0.15, and they're 7.5 points worse per 100 possessions with him on the floor. In other words, he's a freshman point guard in the SEC, Sam. He is a freshman
Yeah,
point guard in the SEC, and that's not a good thing to have if you are a coach fighting for your job right now. Markel Sutton, again, we talk about it every offseason. You got to be aware of these Summit League transfers. They're going to put up massive numbers in a league where defense is not even theoretical. It's just sort of like, a thing we do to occupy time before we get to go score again. Beware any Summit transfer in their stat line in the portal. He's off to a bit of a slow start, and so then you're left with Max McKinnon, Pablo Tamba, Mike Nwoko's played well in stretches for them, after getting out of Starkville. But point is, they just don't have the on-ball juice in Thomas. Sutton hasn't quite scaled up the way they wanted. Rashad King, a guy that I think Missouri kind of looked at briefly out of Northeastern, has not translated. Again, beware of guys from like low conferences with big numbers. They're going to always take a hit usually. So I think this team could be pretty good if they had Daydan Thomas healthy. If they didn't lose Jalen Reed to a knee injury or an Achilles injury again, and one of the two up transfers had popped. But that just hasn't happened yet. They're 0-3 now. This is a big week for them. Missouri just played a desperate team in Ole Miss who showed up and showed some fight. Kentucky shows up.
They have a brutal 2 weeks.
And that was what I say. They did not get a friendly start from the SEC schedulers. They get Kentucky on Wednesday, and Kentucky is
I would argue getting A&M, who I will admit they're better than we all thought they would be. But getting them on the road
Carolina,
and getting South Carolina at home is a pretty good start. They didn't have Daydan Thomas.
Yeah.
But then they go Vandy, Kentucky, Missouri, Florida. Arkansas. Missouri's the break.
Yeah. Now, they get Kentucky without Jalen Lowe, and
True.
we know that Kentucky team has looked adrift is a kind way to say how Kentucky looks right now at times.
Looked pretty good against Mississippi State. Thankfully, they waited until that game to really figure out their offense.
To get things going. Thank you guys for waiting. So it's going to be interesting. The LSU's turning the ball over 21% of the time. They're the 16th best offense in SEC play. Now they got to face Missouri. People will be shocked to hear this is the best 2-point defense in the SEC. It is true. Then both Kim Palm and Synergy back that up. So a team that struggles to score, turns the ball over, doesn't have its typical on-ball creator, now has to maybe 0-4 when Missouri pulls into town. That's a game where they're either going to be really motivated to avoid 0-5, because once that happens, you're pretty much the bird's cooked, or they're going to lay down and they're going to give up the ghost. It'll depend, I think, on whether or not Daydan Thomas is back. If Daydan Thomas is back, man, that it may be bad news in Baton Rouge. But again,
well, so Thomas, just on that note, while we were kind of talking about it, I did sort of do a quick search.
It's a lower leg thing, right?
They are doubtful that he returns for the Kentucky game, but they do think he will be back for Missouri, which, of course.
Of course. But point is, I just think that they've got questions about stretching their rotational capacity. I'm looking at I said the same thing. They got some pretty good guys in terms of BPR in their top 6, better than Ole Miss did. Now, one of them is missing in Daydan Thomas, and he's the best one. But you line those BPRs up of Markel Sutton, Max McKinnon, and Pablo Tamba, Nwoko, and Robert Miller. They're awfully close to the guys after Mark Mitchell and Anthony Robinson. So Missouri can't look at this and say, oh, there's a decisive edge here. Ole Miss was probably less talented in terms of BPR than LSU, and you just lost to them on the road. So you can't overlook this team, but they're struggling to score. You're doing a good enough job so far inside the arc. If Thomas is not quite himself coming back, and you can get some paint touches and you can start scoring, maybe you can eke out a road win here. But I think it's going to be interesting to see just what the lineups look like and what shape Thomas is in if he does go on Saturday. But it's a make or break week for Kentucky, and not for Kentucky, but for LSU. I'm interested to see how they respond Wednesday and what that carryover might look like. So that's not hard numbers. That's more soft, squishy stuff, but that's where I think they are. I think.
And what sort of weight can you put on the Sean Phillips return to the Red Stick? Pistol Pete Maravich Athletic Center. Isn't that what it's called? The Maravich
I hope they had
Athletic Center?
The Pete Maravich Assembly Center.
Assembly Center. Yeah, I'm going to say you used to cover those guys, so
I did.
Know.
I did used to cover those guys. Spent some time in the press row at the PMAC. I would say team meal, Pa Rains. Rains, guys. Take them there. Go to Pa Rains, get some good seafood there. Assuming
I don't know that I would recommend seafood before the basketball game. let's let's
I'd
stick
risk
to
it for
land
Power
animals
Reigns,
just to
man.
be safe.
Nah. You won't be sick after Power Reigns, man. Look, the thing you worry about more in Baton Rouge is mid-afternoon traffic trying to get to Power Reigns and actually
Yeah.
eating at Power Reigns. But um, I, I think they got to get a split this week. I, I'll just say I think they get it at LSU, just because that feels like a game where I don't think they're going to overlook LSU, particularly if they don't get a result on Wednesday. I think they're going to go into Baton Rouge knowing they need a result, and so I'm going to take a split this week. And 3-2 is still better than what they were forecasted in preseason. Now, if they could find a way, 4-1, if they were, coming out of that, I think you'd feel really, really good, and we could sort of say, okay, at four
Well,
and one, you still have a lot of pathways to where you want to get to.
right, and not to look ahead too much, but the following week is probably as agreeable of a week as you have the rest of the year,
Yeah,
because you have home games against Georgia and Oklahoma. Neither of those teams have performed particularly well on the road.
no,
Georgia, are they still ranked in the AP poll? They were ranked.
I
They're
think they will be.
28th in
Yeah,
Ken Palm, but Oklahoma's 54th. And I think if you can at least get a split this week, you have a really good chance to kind of get 2 home wins the week after. And so, when you're looking at beyond that, a road trip to Alabama, um, you definitely want to.
yeah. I'm pulling
Although
up the
Alabama
schedule,
just looked pretty bad against Texas, and Texas has not looked good against anybody.
which is what we're saying. This league is so flat where I think even like Vanderbilt looked vulnerable at times against LSU. So I think it's a league where we're gonna see some funky results sometimes, just because the depth of rosters themselves are pretty thin at this point. I'm looking at this right now in October. The forecast to start the year was a loss to Florida, a loss to Kentucky, a win at Ole Miss, a win at Auburn, loss at LSU, win at home against Georgia. So basically 3-3 out of the gate. Essentially, if you could come out of this at 4-2, you're still feeling pretty good. The middle of the schedule is where things were supposed to get a little bit more favorable for them. Starting with the visit from Vanderbilt on February 17th, the closing stretch is brutal. They get Vandy, Arkansas, Tennessee, and a trip to Arkansas in there as well. They got to go to Oklahoma in there and to Mississippi State. So the thought was, could you steal enough on the front end to make your hay in the middle and hope you could hold on at the end? If they could somehow dig out a sweep this week and be at 4-1, the back end starts to look a little bit less daunting because you stashed some hay early on here. So that's really what I keep looking at. Is can you every result now offsets one that you are going to be forecasted to lose probably later on down the home stretch. So we'll see what they can do, and what version of this team we get this week. I would like just something consistent. If you're going to be good, be good. If you're going to be bad, be bad. This oscillating thing is messing with me too much.
Yeah. So we're gonna wrap it up. Kyler did want to know if you made it to Highland. I know you did not make it to the Highland shootout this year.
I did not make it this year. Thought I was going to have a family thing. That family thing was then canceled. Uh, so I have not consumed any content yet, and I have not gone to watch the archive stream of it yet. But the pictures I saw and the clips I saw made it seem like the thing Highland always is, which is packed, fun. They bring great teams in. I hope people got out and got to see one. Just there was Jackson Davis, I think, was down. He's a really good player out of Chicago. Was down. They brought in Logan Rogersville, you know, which has a kid that's going to go to Indiana who we don't talk about anymore, who Missouri was recruiting for a bit. They obviously had the
I've
Scotty.
completely forgotten his name by now, so it doesn't
The,
matter.
we've got Scotty and Jason Crow. It was Principia's fantastic. I really need to see Principia and your old boss. Apparently number 2 in the Max Brett poll. Congratulations to Jay on building another team there. And that team's got Sekou Sisse, who's a really good big man. I think they've got another combo guard that's really, really good. So just I want to get and see Principia. Basically, if you got out to Highland, I'm jealous. You saw really, really good prep stuff. They always do a great job. It's a great venue, and they're just a good host. They do it right. They understand that it's a community effort, and everyone turns out for that, which you love to see. So sad I couldn't make it, but I will have to find time for the streams at some point to catch up.
Well, so that's going to do it for us. We're already past our allotted time, so we're going to wrap this up. Yeah, Missouri's at LSU on Saturday, Wednesday, home against Auburn. Hopefully, they can get some results, and we'll be feeling really good in our podcast next week. But we will be back next week to talk more Tiger basketball. So until then, everybody, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you then. Bye.